You may recall that in 1945, with the end of the Second World War, the Japanese who were then in our country were to be disarmed. And in the north, Chiang Kai-shek forces were sent into our country, on the north part of our country, while in the south, the British troops came to disarm the Japanese. Under the flag of the British troops, the French came back. And they stayed on until 1954, 9 years more, with Dien Bien Phu, you may recall it, in our country. And then, before 1954, before Dien Bien Phu, while American troops, not troops, but military advisors and supplies already came to Vietnam. And immediately after the French came out, we had American troops, first military advisors, and then troops in our country, until 1975. And with the war, well, you may call it Vietnam War, and I understand it because I speak English. But you come to Vietnam and talk about Vietnam War, people would be wondering which war you are talking about. Because in Vietnam, we call it American War in Vietnam. Before that, we had French War in Vietnam. Before that, we had Chinese wars in Vietnam. And before the end of the American War in Vietnam, as we call it, you will call it Vietnam War. The Khmer Rouge already attacked us along the southwestern borders. And you may recall the 17th of April 1975, when the Khmer Rouge succeeded in taking power in Phnom Penh. They already were on the border with Vietnam. So the war went on and on until 1979, when the Chinese again fought us with 600,000 troops all along the northern border, 1,350 kilometers along the border. Then, that was quite brief. But another war, which we call it undeclared war, which started in 1967, lasted until the 3rd of February 1994. It is the embargo, the trade and economic embargo imposed by the US administration. We call it undeclared war because, now, first, perhaps I need a short pause here to say that I'm just recalling history. I don't mean to blame, to criticize anything. I'm just recalling history. Let me tell you one example of that embargo's impact on our country in order to say how we and why we call it an undeclared war. Airplanes, passenger airplanes we used by then were all, without any exception, imported from the Soviet Union. And those planes that we were using in the 70s, 80s, and early 90s were actually imported into our country as early as in the late 50s and early 60s of the last century. By that I mean they were worn out. And if information was reaching you that time, you may have heard about every now and then a crash of passenger planes, meaning killing of hundreds of people, at least dozens of people. Then I remember in 1991, the first highest ranking official from the West visited Vietnam was an Italian foreign minister. And one of the things he agreed with us was to help us to reach out to the world. And one of the activities, one of the agreements was to get a wet lease of 2 Airbuses. You know what is meant by wet lease? Lease of not only the aircraft, but also the pilots. That's a wet lease. The agreement was reached, but it was never materialized because Airbus 320 contains quite a number of high-tech components. And according to the Act of Trading with Enemy Nations, those high-tech components can never be exported to enemy nations by the states. So people continue to be killed by those passengers, by crashes, plane crashes. And that's why we call it an undeclared war. And that war, as I said, only concluded on the 3rd of February 1994, 6 years before the end of the century. And that is why I said for 100 years of the last century, Vietnamese only had 6 years in full peace.
But that's now absolutely remarkable that with a history which is so devastatingly governed by memories of 100 years of war, that you should have recovered so completely and so fast. This is miraculous. As of today, you are the President of the Security Council of the United Nations.
Not tomorrow.
1st of October. No, you are the President. As of the 1st of October, I'm sorry to correct you. But it's a remarkable achievement that a country which has been at the receiving end should be able to forget and to adjust. The whole country is like Mandela. You have been able to turn the status completely. How does the memory of what happened in the past 100 years govern Vietnam today?
Well, thank you very much for the question. Actually, that helps me refrain from interrupting when you were talking about the fact, no, you are saying that we have fully recovered from the war. Actually, no, not yet. Not yet, and still far from it. During that war, you call Vietnam War, this nation, the American nation, lost more than 58,000 people. That is a very, very painful loss of the nation. I particularly recall that when I remember the Memorial Day, not long ago. But remember, in our country, we lost 3.5 million, 3.5 million people, and 4 million others wounded. You are still looking for MIAs, missing in action personnel, from the Vietnam War, from the Korean War. The Korean War ended in 1953. You are still looking for remains of them. With the assistance and cooperation of our side, which has always been highly, highly appreciated by Washington, you have only more than 1,000 missing in action now on the list. And we are still working, trying to make full account of them. But on our side, we still have 300,000 missing in action. I believe Vietnam is the only one country in the world where every week we still have a TV program, a national TV program, providing information for the public and asking for feedback, if there is any, on their whereabouts. Let alone things like unexploded ordnance.